So let's get rolling, and welcome everybody to the, I guess you could say that's our 12th Playbook event, although first virtual event. Thanks to COVID, we get to actually change up the formats here and spread our message a little wider. And so this will be our very first virtual one. And we have about twice as many people signed up for this event as have ever actually attended a physical Playbook event. And so that's an exciting opportunity as well. So if you haven't heard of StarFish Medical, we're a medical device and biotech device development services company covering North America. And we've been doing this for about 150 people for the last 21 years. If you're interested in medical device development, take a look at our website. We produce more blog and video content than anybody else in our industry. So we're happy to help you. Just take a look and maybe you'll learn something. So the premise of the Playbook event, which we've been running for a while, is to inspire medical device and biotech device entrepreneurship. We believe that being an entrepreneur is kind of a lonely thing. You need to have a community of peers. It's sort of a complex thing. You need to also reference off of inspiring stories just to develop the emotional capacity to take on challenges one after another. And so we try to bring those experts to the table and those stories to inspire you. And so that's what we've been up to for the last 7 years, and it's been a pretty exciting journey. So today, our topic is how to adapt to the COVID era. There's changes all over the place. Some of them are going to be durable. Hopefully walking around with a mask around your neck like this won't be one of those durable things. But the question is, how do you position your company and yourself relative to all these changes? Because there's a lot of noise and a lot of media and all sorts of things that are confusing. So today we have three really amazing presenters. I'm really excited to be able to bring these stories to you. We have Harry Glorickian from Boston. So he's going to present on what's happening in the investment market. If you need to raise capital over the next year or two, you're going to really need to know how to position your company relative to those trends. Nick Allen will share insights on what to expect in the diagnostics market. Turns out the immune system is complicated, and turns out that COVID's not just a respiratory infection. So there's a lot to be learned there, especially if you're in the diagnostics industry. And then Daryl Wisdahl will share insights on what's actually happening on the ground with the regulators and with the submissions of products, because there's, once again, a lot of noise around that. But if you have to do a submission in the next year or two, what should you expect? And after all the three speakers have gone, each of them will have 20 minutes, then you'll have some time for Q&A. And we'll be happy to ask the speakers questions. So we want this to be really useful for you. So please give us feedback on what you learned here, what you'd like to learn. If you know somebody that you think would make an inspiring speaker for one of these in the future, we're going to be doing one once a month. So it's a whole new era for us as well. So let's move on to our first speaker. So Harry Glorickian, he's an influential global business expert. He's based in Boston. He's had more than 3 decades of building successful ventures in North America, Europe, and Asia, and the rest of the world. He's known for his achievements in life sciences, healthcare, diagnostics, healthcare IT, and the convergence of all these things, including a 10-year stint working as a business advisor to many leading companies around the world. He's a sought-after speaker, and he currently serves as a general partner with New Venture Funds. Before that, he was an entrepreneur in residence with General Electric Ventures in the New Business Creation Group. He's also on the board of Gene News, which is a molecular diagnostics company. And there's a long list of amazing things he's done. Evidation Health, which is a digital health startup, and Drawbridge Health, which is a diagnostic startup. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Harry to share some insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to StarFish for asking me to come speak. Let me go to my first slide. So as we all know, and these numbers are dated, I think if you're not updating them every day, they become dated at some point, is COVID is having a dramatic effect on a global scale. Forcing governments to initiate lockdowns and basically having a dramatic effect on the global economy. And what I like to say about this situation is, as opposed to any other effect that we've seen on the healthcare sector or on economies, I think what we're going to see from this is a very, very strong durability of change, because how long it's going to take to get out of it. 9/11 was something that changed something, but it was basically a one-day event, and it still had some durability of change. But this is, I'm calling this like this. I don't expect this to get much better until next March is my calculation. So you can see here the numbers keep going up. We all know this. It's right now it's not very positive, and lost my slides there, guys. I will keep going up. They're back. Thank you. So you can see on a global scale, all countries are struggling with this. Some better, some worse. We're expecting a second wave later this year. In some places, we're already seeing a second wave, depending on where you are in the United States. And when flu season comes up, I think we're going to have some trouble managing both flu and COVID simultaneously. Hopefully, we will see a vaccine towards the end of the year. The outfall of this is, if you can imagine as an investor, I'm looking at, okay, how is this affecting who will buy, how things will get sold, how is the market changing, what are the business models that will emerge as we work our way out of this. But you can see that a number of people are out of jobs, which is going to sort of change insured versus uninsured. The Medicare population will probably go up. There was just an announcement this morning that there's going to be another 12 million people that will get eviction notices, within the next 2 to 4 weeks. So you're going to see a big change on the buying groups, or where things are happening and how this is affecting providers. Most countries are struggling right now to maintain financial stability because of the impact of global healthcare spending, and this is actually causing a much, much bigger issue to happen on a global scale. In the United States in particular, the only thing that's actually keeping some of the places afloat is the CARES Act that we've put in place. You can see right now that loss of health insurance coverage and limiting access to healthcare is changing how people are going to get their healthcare and where they're going to get there from. And you'll see where I'm going with this as I go forward. But it's not necessarily people going into the ivory towers the way they used to. And you can see here from a hospital perspective, they are all hurting right now from there's been a drop in elective surgeries, a drop in the number of appointments, which is their bread and butter on how they generate revenue. They are all having some level of potential liquidity issues. They're all rethinking their brick and mortar dynamics. And as you can see, even going forward into year 3, the expected elective volume is not getting back to 100%. So things like post-op and pre-op, my anticipation is we're going to see more of a telemedicine or a remote interaction. And that is going to also have to involve some level of diagnostic, whether it's a digital diagnostic or a biological diagnostic. As you can see here in this chart, digital health is expected to do very well over time, especially from a market perspective and a total EBITDA perspective. And providers, if you notice, are actually getting hit pretty hard on this. So I think what you're seeing in this evolution is providers aren't going to be exactly the way they are today. I think you'll see a lot of the CVS, Aetna playing a larger role. Walmart has been announcing that they're establishing more areas where they can see patients and manage patients. Walmart actually just applied to also be an insurer. So I think you're going to see sort of insurer and hybrid providers be more of a evolutionary step that's going forward. If you go to countries like China, you're already seeing internet hospitals growing so that they can manage the level of patients that they have to deal with basically remotely. Testing is going up, thank God, in the United States. We still don't have enough, and we're still not implementing it the right way, which frankly baffles me, especially, I've been in this industry for about 25 years. But hopefully cooler heads will prevail and we will work our way out of this. But this volume really is causing some interesting innovations to happen in the space, which I'll talk about shortly. As you can see from a revenue perspective, Q3 and forward to Q2 2021, you're seeing a quadrupling of those numbers, basically going from $3 billion of COVID tests to almost $13 billion of COVID tests. So it's not just the COVID tests that need to be taken into consideration, but we need to manage patients for a lot of other ailments. So either remote testing or remote sample acquisition is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and implementing telehealth that allows a patient to interact with a physician, along with having that data from a diagnostic test or a digital monitoring platform, is going to be critical to help manage those patient populations. You can see that, at least from a molecular standpoint, the numbers are sort of very large as the number of approvals. I'll talk a little bit about the antibody tests here, but I'm a little disappointed in how the FDA handled some of that. But you can see here that majority of these tests are LDTs, or high throughput solutions. And this is as of April. So May, there was another change. June, there was another change. So this is not completely 100% up to date as far as the results from where we are at the moment. Interesting, I'm not used to the market literally moving almost on a weekly basis, but that's what's been happening under COVID. So as someone from an investing perspective, there's a lot of sort of looking at where things are going and how things are changing on a regular basis to predict where the market's going to go in the next 12, 24, 36 months. Antibody and antigen tests, there's been a scramble to have these out. The number of incorrect or products that don't give you the right answer has been shocking. I'm hoping that the FDA steps up and does what it needs to do to sort of manage that accordingly, so that we start to get a cleaner answer or picture of what's going on in the market. And finally, I think we're starting to move towards pooling testing, where we might be able to do more monitoring of the population and what's going on out there. So all of this has caused a big change, in my opinion, on the regulatory front. Everything from telemedicine being opened up in a way that I think would have taken another 5 to 10 years under normal circumstances has happened in what feels like no time under COVID. Even areas like pathology, where now you can enable someone to look at pathology side outside of the labs itself. So being able to look at them remotely, which is sort of driving the digital pathology space in a way that, I was talking about digital pathology 25 years ago, and now it seems to be getting the shot in the arm like it's never had before. One of the results of all of these regulatory changes is going to be a shift in potential opportunity for the business model. And I think if anybody's in the space, you need to be asking yourself is, do you follow the same rubric that everybody has followed all along, or do you start to think about the market in a different way? If you look at companies that are in the telemedicine space, there are a number here, and this is not by any stretch of the imagination an exhaustive list of companies, but you can see how they're getting a leg up right now. They'll probably have a leg up until spring of next year at a minimum. And then once they're in place, I think going backwards is just, I don't know, it could happen, but I'm saying it's almost an impossibility because everybody's going to be used to the new normal. Once you put that in place, you can see how the next phase, which is how do I get samples from these patients? Getting samples remotely is going to be a bigger and bigger opportunity. Monitoring patients remotely is going to be a bigger and bigger opportunity. Potentially even doing diagnostics at the person's home where the data gets reported back to the physician is going to be a bigger and bigger opportunity that we've talked about for some time. It's not just the usual players that are playing a bigger role in this. As you can see here, you've got CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, Kroger's, Walmart playing a bigger and bigger role in this. Now they are all taking samples and they're sending them to central laboratories. But I think that's what you're seeing today. I think what you're going to see 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now is this rubric may not be exactly the same as it is today. I think you'll see more work being done, if possible, at these regional hubs that these groups are setting up. And the driver to all this is they're not just providing a service like a provider is, they're also migrating towards being an insurer. So in their minds, if they can keep you healthy by looking at things preventatively, so healthy care versus sick care, and you're paying your premiums and not going to the hospital and draining the coffers, that's actually a great business for them because they're sitting there and cutting coupons. So in my mind, technologies that allow for anything to happen in the wild, in these centers, at the home, remotely, and things that have a data stream so that I can monitor that patient over a longer period of time and see things before they happen is where the market has been migrating to. And I'm actually giving a talk to about 50 hospitals next week, sort of on this same topic about how these changes are going to affect their revenues directly. But you can see here that there's a number of different products that are coming out on the digital biomarker space that are really moving the needle. I just was actually talking to the CEO of Aura the other day for my podcast, and we were talking about how you can actually see the onset of a change physiologically 4 to 5 days before the person actually feels that there's a problem. And that can be an early warning sign that they could go, say, right now, go get a COVID test. During flu season, you'll have to differentiate between flu and COVID, but these technologies are becoming very easy to implement in the field that would then trigger potentially a more traditional diagnostic assay to be done for confirmation, as opposed to the way that we do it now, which is you've got to be sick and then somebody tests you, which is sort of, it's done that way only because that's the only way that we've made money historically. I think the way that we're going to make money in the future is going to dramatically change, and COVID has just accelerated it by, in my opinion, in some sectors, anywhere between 5 and 10 years earlier. The other shift that I think you're going to see is anybody that is a provider that doesn't think about adding an insurance arm to themselves is missing an opportunity. During COVID, the only groups that made money, really, without the CARES Act, were insurers. And that's the end of my piece. So I will relinquish any time that I still have left to the next speaker.
All right. Thank you so much, Harry. I know you could talk for about another hour and a half, and we'd be fascinated the whole time. So, but we'll take what we can get for the moment. And we're, as I mentioned, we're going to hold the Q&A till after the three speakers have gone. And at that time, you'll notice that there's a Q&A tab to your right. And then people can enter your questions as you like, and I'll moderate that Q&A after. So let's get rolling and on to the next speaker. Nick Allen, who is the manager of bioservices at StarFish, has 19 years of regulatory and product development experience in the industry, particularly in all sorts of biotech solutions. Proof of concept studies, anti-infective candidates, regulatory submission studies. He was also a key contributor to the ASTM standard, you'll be interested, E2799-11, the first protocol that was a biofilm growth standard and disinfection protocol. He holds a MS in microbiology and Bachelor of Science in biology from the University of Guelph. So welcome, Nick. Tell us your stories.
Very good. Thanks very much, Scott, and thanks very much for the opportunity to come and speak here today. Of all the wonderful speakers in StarFish, I'm honored that I was selected to share a little time and some ideas with everyone today. So following on the excellent talk from Harry, I'm going to be talking about commercialization opportunities, specifically in diagnostics, not just in medical devices in general. As Scott alluded to, for those of you who don't know much about StarFish, we're a medical device product development company, and we have a really unique holistic approach to doing that. There's 130 plus of us. And we have functional expertise in several areas: human factors, industrial design, electronics, mechanical, computing, biotechnology, and the like. And that's kind of one of the really unique things about StarFish, is that we have this all in one house, or under many in many houses right now because of COVID. But we're all able to bring all of this power to bear on projects that come in. I'm going to focus a little bit about the bioservices group. That's where I come out of. And we've just done a little bit of rebranding this year. Actually, prior to COVID taking place in January, we did a bit of a rebrand. We started the group in about 2016, and we have a focus, like with the rest of our group, on design and development of medical devices, but we have a slightly more biotech focus, if you will. We have pharma applications. We have a really a deep depth of knowledge in capsule endoscopy, point of care diagnostics, which I'll talk to you about a bit today, and something that Harry was alluding to as well. We utilize the bioservices with our proven development process that we have with the rest of the group, and we bring that all together to work on some really absolutely fascinating projects, which I'll share a little bit of some insight into that with you here. The big change we made to our bioservices group this year was we came up with what we call 3 practice areas. One in microfluidics, and that's headed up by Dr. Lorenzo Gutierrez in our Toronto office. And also we have Maharshi Trivedi, who's joined us just recently as well. And when we're able to, I would certainly invite everyone to come to our Toronto office and take a look at a brand new state-of-the-art microfluidics space that's there. We're hoping to do some really great work there. And in fact, I think I'll do a little bit of a plug. I think next month we're going to be talking about microfluidics, perhaps in one of these seminars. So hope you'll have a chance to join us there as well. We also have a regenerative medicine group headed up by Brian Hanrahan. We're also very excited to say that we're able to convince Dr. Stephanie Willerth, who's an expert in this area, to come and serve as a scientific advisor in this area. And again, perhaps we'll have a webinar on that as well. And today I'm here to talk to you about the third practice arm, and that's microbiology. See Sue Banchuk there, one of our great technicians doing some work. And that's an area that's near and dear to me, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So I've got a slide that's up here, and it has a couple of different things that you may notice. There's the cartoon diagram, which we're all very familiar with by now. This virus particle that looks like a crown, the coronavirus. This is a cartoon of the SARS-CoV-2. And I put beside it a transmission electron micrograph that I took over 20 years ago now. It's hard for me to believe that. This is some work that I did that really captured my imagination in microbiology. Unfortunately, there's an overlay of some phages here, but there's a little thing blubbing off here. This was one of my first products that I worked on developing. I had the opportunity to work with the late, great Dr. Terry Beveridge, developing, using bacteria, one of the natural phenomena that's producing these membrane blebs as a vector for delivering antibiotics and other things. And so that really captured my passion in terms of doing microbiology, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that today. And one of the things that's interesting about microbes, not only on the disease prevention side, but some of the interesting things that they are able to do for us, if we're able to harness these things. They've been around for 3.5 billion years, and we're able to do a bunch of interesting things. Of course, the term that a lot of you will have heard, a nice acronym, is PCR, polymerase chain reaction, and it's often called the TAC polymerase. And the reason for that, which you may not know, is TAC stands for Thermus aquaticus, and that's the organism that Carey Mullis originally isolated the polymerase from, and that allows us to do all these wonderful diagnostics I'm about to talk about. So it comes from bacteria. Another thing that you may have heard about in the news is CRISPR. This is super cool, and one of the areas that I want to talk about in our chat this afternoon. It comes from the bacterial immune system, if you can believe it. The little phage particles that I have here, these little landing ships, that's the bacteria have been exposed to these for about 3 billion years and developed an immune system, and this is where we developed CRISPR from, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Microbes also do develop antibiotics for us. They produce them. If that's not exciting enough, if you follow the work from Lynn Margulis, they're also thought to be our predecessor to mitochondria, which of course generates all the energy in our bodies. And finally, last but not least, if that's not exciting enough for you, you can use them to do some fermentation and make some of your favorite beverages. But anyway, we'll get into the infectious diseases side of things here. One of the, as Harry alluded to, there's quite a bit of development in this in the next little bit. I know, Scott, when you and I were in 2016 talking about setting up the biotech group, we had set some numbers looking at the CAGRs, and I was often shocked at how big the infectious disease market is. And Harry, as you mentioned in your talk, these numbers are changing daily, of course. So I'm not going to get into these numbers too much. I think Harry did a much better job, and perhaps his numbers were a little bit more accurate. But all that to say is that there is certainly some opportunity in this space as the market is growing. One of the things that COVID has done in the last couple of months has shone a great, big, bright light on in vitro diagnostics, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. One of the things that's going to digress for a moment, if I may, we're pitching this as a commercialization opportunity, and the title of that sounds a little bit ambulance chasey, perhaps, or opportunistic, and it's really not. It's not meant to be. Look, the COVID-19 is a tremendously impactful thing on society. It's affecting millions of people across the world. There's a lot of loss of life, and we treat that very seriously. But one of the things that comes out of that, as with any of the past pandemics, we put humanity under these great pressures. It forces us to develop and come up with technological advances and look in directions that we hadn't previously. A classic example was in the Great Bubonic Plague in the 1300s. It caused the loss of about 300 million lives, and historically, because of that loss of the workforce, it was thought to be the impetus behind the Industrial Revolution. Same with smallpox, when that was, over the last 100 years or so, 500 million lives lost from that, and it caused the development of the pox vaccine, modern vaccination, which we all, of course, are very interested in. So all of these incidents forced us to shines a bright light on things and forces us to develop and move on. And so that's really, when we're talking about opportunities, take that in the spirit of that in this discussion. That's what I'm hopeful to talk about today. So I'm going to break this into two components. I'm going to talk to you about the technological opportunities that are developing because of the COVID-19. Of course, coming from an engineering firm, we're going to talk a little bit about design considerations my daily job is I interface with some clients with some really amazing products, and we try and framework out how to take a product from a cocktail napkin to something that you should use. Give you a couple of examples, some really interesting things that are coming up in the future that I've got my eye on. And as Harry alluded to, certainly look at this paradigm shift to looking at point of care and talk to a little bit about that. If I don't get too rambly, I'd like to talk about some novel diagnostic opportunities, looking at some other diseases, the so-called COVID syndrome, and something that's near and dear to me, the microbiome. So let's talk about technological opportunities. And as I do that, I'll take a bit of a digression here. And when we talk to folks that come to us and they want to develop a new diagnostic system, we break things down into two key things, and quite rascally, they sound almost the same, and everybody gets confused by these terms. But we look at sensitivity and specificity, and they're quite different. Now, I'll use an example here. We've got a nasopharyngeal swab for testing COVID-19. If you think about how these things are used, you've got this swab and you stick it somewhere, usually up the nose, the back of the throat. And so this thing needs to be, the test that you're going to run with this needs to be sensitive. It has to detect whatever amount of particles are going to be there and be able to distinguish that from the rest of the schmutz that's at the back of my nose. And so it needs to be sensitive. It also needs to be specific. As I go back there, there's other coronaviruses, the common cold. It has to be specific enough to say, hey, this is detecting the SARS-CoV-2 and not the cold that my kid brought home from preschool. And so that's what I talk about when we talk about sensitivity and specificity. When we look at the different types of tests that are standard, they're kind of break it up into two camps. One is what I would call immunodiagnostics, and the other camp would be molecular diagnostics. And so if we think about the immunochemistry or the immunodiagnostics, basically all of these are around antigen-based detection systems. A system that you have here in this diagram on the slide here that a lot of folks will be familiar with at home is the pregnancy test. Rather than detecting increases in hormones, though, we're going to be using these tests to look at specific antigens. If you think about that coronavirus, looking at the proteins there and having an immune response, you see a positive that shows up on these tests. Typically, antigen tests, and this is something, Harry, we can perhaps talk about more in the discussions. One of the issues with these quite often is the sensitivity is pretty terrible for the most part, and that's just by nature of the test. 30 to 80% sensitivity. Specificity also is a bit challenging depending on how you develop them. But where this makes a lot of advantages is in the ease of use. Think about the home use application for the pregnancy test. Just pee on the thing and you can get a response. And the time to result is in the 30 minutes. So very, very powerful tool in that context. Another version of this is the antibody test, and that is rather than generating our monoclonal antibodies and mounting them on a strip, it's actually using our own bodies as the generator of the antibodies. The antigen comes in, i.e. the coronavirus, expresses an antibody, we do a blood test, and if we can detect those antibodies, we know we're exposed to that. The trouble here, of course, is our bodies take about 2 weeks to mount a response. So it takes about 2 weeks to detect that. It doesn't show live viral particles, but does show our response. This is going to be very, very important in development in assays in this area for monitoring immune response and then for getting back to work. And so very important. And then finally, the real gold standard in this area is the molecular diagnostic test using reverse transcriptase PCR to detect RNA virus, and then using real-time PCR, RT-PCR to detect them. Also very rascally in terms of terms. But really the sensitivity and the specificity here is the key, greater than 90%. And the big problem here, though, is the ease of use. Typically, you need someone wearing a white lab coat and pipetting things around and having some knowledge of the primers and things of that nature. So that's a bit of the downside there, and the time to result is a bit long. So those are considerations to think about when we look at some of these opportunities. A couple of really interesting things that have come up. This is Lexigene out of Massachusetts. And so they've done a really interesting thing where they've taken the really awesome sensitivity and specificity of the RT-PCR, combined that in a multiplex system, so running multiple at the same time, And where they're able to get the advantage here is they've added a microfluidic component that reduces the time to read and takes away the complexity of the system. And so it makes it really, truly one of these point of care applications. And so opportunities in this space, not necessarily this one in particular, but areas around here are something to keep an eye on, certainly in the future. Another absolutely mind-blowing technology that's come up really in the last decade is this CRISPR, the clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, basically utilizing the immune system of bacteria and part of a diagnostic. There's a nice diagram here, which is a bit complicated, so I won't go into too much detail here. This is out of a recent publication from Nature, kind of highlighting how this works. Essentially, without going into the details here, basically you can have you can customize the Cas12 protein. When it detects the RNA of interest, it changes it to conformation, and it can cleave reporter DNA that's in there, and that can be detected in a short amount of time. Couple that with something that's isothermic, i.e. one temperature, where you're not having to cycle it like in PCR, and you can have a very powerful point of care type actionable system being developed. The other really interesting thing is if you can pair this with a immunodiagnostic like a lateral flow strip, you really get the best of both worlds, where you get the sensitivity and the specificity of the molecular system with the ease of use and the turnaround time of the immunosystem, and you can get these results in an unprecedented amount of time with ease. And so really, in terms of future development, my money's really on CRISPR-related technologies. Of course, another area of development and for improvement is the old swab. Are you kidding me? These things are terrible to use, and you have to be fairly skilled to actually get a reasonable sample. And so we're going to see a lot of improvement in areas in this. And I'm not going to go into that too much. Another thing that Harry alluded to is this point of care concept, which is something that we often struggle with here. We talk to folks who are looking at developing an infectious disease diagnostic. Right off the top, they always want to look at point of care, and we can get into that quite a bit. But really, I think in the case of COVID-19, particularly, see these long lineups where we're saying, hey, if you're sick, everybody show up at the same place at the same time, and we'll test you out. I mean, talk about a recipe for disaster there. And so certainly in COVID-19 testing in particular, there is a tremendous both push and technological reason for making these systems truly point of care, where you can have at-home diagnostics and rather than have everybody kind of who's expressing symptoms come together and share those. So certainly something that we're going to see some development there in the future. Talking a little bit about point of care, I'm not going to go into this too much just because of time. But the key crux of this is when we talk about point of care, we're really talking about actioning those results at where the test is being administered. In the case of the long lineup I showed before, or at the pharmacy, as Harry alluded to, that's really what point of care talks about. And with the technological advances and the development that we're doing here, certainly that is something that we're going to be. Not only is there pressure from COVID to do that, but certainly something that's certainly was happening before this and will be accelerated in the days to come. I won't go into this acronym here. So right now I'm going to take a bit of time to talk about some of the novel diagnostic opportunities I see on the horizon that the response to COVID-19 has highlighted, and we'll be able to leverage some of the technological advances into this front as well. So when I think about some of the other opportunities, really this can be grouped into three categories. I mean, COVID-19 is the big talk of the town right now, but unfortunately there are a number of other very, very important and terrible infectious agents that are still continue to be a problem. And so those are something to look to into the future. There's this coming out of the literature, there's what we're referring to as the so-called COVID syndrome, which I'll talk a little bit about more, and coming up with systems and opportunities and developing tests around both monitoring that and detecting that are certainly going to be important. And something that I'd like to share also as well is the effects of all of this disinfection on our microbiome. A couple of things just to consider here in terms of global mortality, just to keep in the back of our minds and to show that there really is need for improvement in these areas as well. If we look at some of the top 4 global mortality projected here in 2030, HIV/AIDS is the top of the leaderboard again, with about with about 2 million people succumbing to that, and the numbers for this tuberculosis, malaria, and other communicable diseases are also certainly something on the horizon, are not going away. But if we are able to take some of these technological advances that we get from diagnosing COVID-19, certainly we're going to see some improvements in these areas as well, which is really, truly wonderful. Let me just see if we can skip the slide here. Here we go. So one of the other truly remarkable things about COVID-19 is not just the tremendous impacts it has on its own, but what we're seeing in the literature. And again, take a lot of this, as Harry alluded to, on the financial side, the numbers are coming out daily. So too, in terms of literature, what we're seeing in terms of effects are coming out daily in terms of the clinical outcomes. And there's a lot of very interesting related effects that we're seeing from COVID-19, such as basically venous thromboembolisms, embolisms, renal failure complication. A really remarkable thing is some of these neurological abnormalities. And one of the really interesting things around that is the fact that we're seeing some indications that there is a ability of the SARS-CoV-2 to invade the central nervous system, which is truly an interesting observation. Although we do see this in other viruses, so not unsuspected, but or not unprecedented rather, but certainly something that we'll see some development work in the future. And of course, as we saw with the original SARS in Eastern North America, there's going to be this post-intensive care syndrome that's going to have to be monitored and managed through diagnostics. One final thing I'd like to share with us this afternoon, and just plant for food for thought, if you will, around the gut microbiome. Potentially, it's an interesting concept there. But one of the concepts has really come about since the 90s that, and we do a lot of work around this here in our department, is this concept around the whole microbiome and its importance in whole health in a number of different respects. It has tremendous effects on our immune system. It simply can protect against opportunistic pathogens by pre-colonizing, produces vitamins, there's a tie to immune diseases. It has this tremendous role that we're every day learning more and more about. And so one of the things that is going to be, if I was to say, a real opportunity for research and development of devices in the future, certainly in the next decade and beyond, would absolutely be around monitoring and understanding and perhaps even correcting issues with the microbiome. A few fun facts just to leave with here on our as before I turn the podium over to somebody else. And something that I noticed on my way in here, I hand sanitized myself about 3 times prior to coming in here, killing off bacteria. And so that unquestionably is going to have an impact on our microbiomes going forward, and something that we need to, as we contend with COVID, something that we're going to need to deal with in the future, unquestionably. And with that, I will turn over the helm to Daryl, and look forward to any back to Scott. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. I'm sure there'll be some questions relating to all of that, because there's a raft of complexity there. Before we get on to Daryl, we're going to pop out a couple of survey questions for you, which will also help with Daryl's presentation. So that will go live now. And I'll get into the introduction in about 30 seconds. That's pretty interesting, actually, seeing all those results pop out live. Okay, well, I'm gonna get rolling, and we'll let Daryl loose on all of you. So watch out. Daryl is a senior regulatory QA consultant for Emergo, which is a UL division based out of Seattle, and he's had more than 25 years of experience in this industry, relating particularly to the regulatory side, but also general business strategy for various companies. He's currently working in US, Canada, and internationally, and he's a program manager for internal auditor programs at Emergo. And what he's going to share with us is sort of what he's seeing on the ground. So if you're trying to launch an actual product and get through regulatory the next while, you'd be very interested to see what's happening at the regulators right now. Okay, over to you, Daryl. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending where you're located. We're going to talk a little bit about how COVID-19 is changing the medical device commercialization from a regulatory perspective. I've got a couple different sections I'm going to look at today, and I thought I'd just start off with what's the current state. So with COVID-19, what we've ended up with is medical devices and IVDs that are being demanded for manufacturers. So we've got the personal protective equipment that companies are being asked to provide to hospitals and to individuals. As Scott mentioned, he has his mask around his neck. So we have our masks and our shields, and we have our gowns and our gloves. And from the respiratory perspective, there's an amazing demand now for invasive and non-invasive ventilators, and of course the consumables that go with it. But we're also talking about diagnostic products, and Nick had given a very good overview of some of the detection type products, as did Harry, that are out there. So whether we're looking at antigen tests to diagnose the product, or we're looking at products that are doing the detection of a product, a detection of issues, we've also got tests that are done for managing patient management. Now, what I wanted to show you on this slide, I think we all have seen the numbers that are coming up in terms of the number of cases around the world, and it's a bit shocking. But what you see here on this graph is that there really isn't a correlation between the number of tests that are available and the number of cases that are being met in that country. What we're having is that the regulatory burden in different countries are causing devices, tests to be lower number of tests to be available in those markets. Now in Europe, diagnostic tests such as this for COVID-19 are self-certified products. Therefore, you see a significant amount of products being available, as the regulatory requirements for that self-certification are dramatically different than what's required to go into the United States or Australia or Canada. Now here we have, for the European Union, as I mentioned, these tests are self-certified, which means there's a significantly less regulatory burden and regulatory oversight for these products. With that, we have 483 tests that have now been self-certified, and that number is as effective as of yesterday. 245 of these are actually for detecting SARS, and 236 of them are for looking for an immune response. In the United States, there's been 186 tests that have gone through the emergency use authorization. The majority of these tests are for detecting the SARS-CoV virus, and a smaller number have been set up for the immune response. In Australia, we now have an even less number, a lower number, I should say, of tests that are available, with 66 tests. But Australia has a very interesting rule in place, which is that based on this exemption order, companies can sell their product or make their product available to Department of Health facilities in Australia without having to go through the entire registration process. What's happening, though, is because of some of the concerns with the product quality, these hospitals and laboratories are now demanding the companies actually register their product in Australia before they try to make the product available, which really is, making this exemption order null and void. Australia also has a very important rule in place which says that self-testing IVDs that are used for serious diseases, of which COVID-19 is one of them, are actually forbidden under the Australian Act. And therefore, if you are developing a test for home use for self-testing, that product will not be available for marketing in Australia. And then we come to my home country, although I'm not living there right now, Canada, where currently there are only 26 tests that have been made available under the interim order in Canada. But we do know that Health Canada has received 58 additional tests that they're reviewing right now. This lower number of tests that have gone through the approval process for Canada is probably based on two things. One is the regulatory requirements that Canada has put in place for this type of product. And in addition, the smaller population, which has led companies to not look at this as a first market. Now, as Harry mentioned in his presentation, there have been a number of issues that have come up, whether the tests are coming back with false positives and false negatives that are not, what is expected, whether there have been issues with sensitivity overall, safety issues. Companies are having their products lose their authorizations by regulators as more information has been coming out. Why is this happening? I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that companies have accelerated their development process in order to get their product onto the market as soon as possible. Now, the question is why are they doing this? I'll leave that with you, but some of us will think whether it's a profit motive or whether this is, in fact, trying to get a product available as soon as possible. Now, this is a bit of a busy slide, and I'm making my slide deck available to those who would like it after this presentation. But one of the things that's important to know is that, there have been some significant issues associated with the COVID-19 development. One of the challenges, as I mentioned in the previous slide, is there's an accelerated design and development cycle, which has led to a lack of planning, which has led to problems getting data properly put in place. Also, companies are really focusing on a single market. So some companies are only focusing on the European market, or some companies are only focusing on the US market. And therefore, their products, when they're trying to get them available for other markets, they may not have all the necessary information available. We also have seen some very insufficient testing being done from an analytical and clinical performance perspective. Sample sizes that have been defined by companies have been substantially smaller than are necessary. Now, I can speak from personal experience within Emergo. As I mentioned, in Europe, these products are considered self-certified, and products that are going into Europe for companies that are not based in that market require what there's known as an authorized representative. Now, our company, Emergo, is an authorized representative, and what we do is before we allow a company to put their name on our name, I should say, on their product, we want to review their technical information to ensure that there is the sufficient amount of information to ensure analytical performance and clinical performance. We have received above 30 applications from companies asking us to be their authorized representative. Our team has gone out and done reviews of these technical documentation files for these diagnostic tests, and the majority of them, in fact, over 90% of them, have come back from our reviewers with insufficient data being presented or problems with their risk management process, which they are not considering some of the risks associated with their product, whether it's a risk with having a false positive or a risk with false negatives. Overall, there's also a fundamental lack of understanding of what's required after the product is on the market. They don't understand, many of these manufacturers don't understand that there are requirements to report any adverse events that they have to the regulators. And finally, companies don't understand necessarily some of the significant issues that they have with making design changes. If you haven't been in a regulated market before and you haven't dealt with the FDA or the CE mark requirements or Canada or Australia or any other regulated market, you may not understand that just because you have an authorization for your product doesn't mean you can go and make changes without going back to that regulator first to ensure that that regulator is accepting of those changes. Now, what are some of the lessons that we've learned from this design and development process? One of the things that we're finding is that companies really don't understand a lot of their quality requirements before they get started. Again, if they're not used to being in this kind of regulated space, the development of a product seems fairly simple. We'll just build the product and we'll make the product available, and it'll have some level of sensitivity and specificity, and that'll be acceptable. The problem with that is that that is not going to ensure that the product is going to be robust enough for the market itself. One of the things also, as I said before, just do they really understand what's necessary for changes to the product? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens under this emergency use authorization that the FDA has issued. Now, in February of 2020, the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is the agency that oversees the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, issued a declaration under Section 564 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, declaring a public health emergency in the United States due to the COVID-19 virus. And what that came from that is that the U.S. Secretary issued a justification for the authorization for emergency use of in vitro diagnostic devices for the detection and or diagnosis of this novel coronavirus. And that's led to companies wanting to get their products into the market. So you have a diagnostic test. You want to go into the United States and you want to get an emergency use authorization. What does this mean? Can you just put together a one-pager and submit it to the FDA? No, the FDA has clearly indicated on their website what the required elements are. One of the critical things, of course, is you have to define your product, but probably more importantly, the FDA wants you to really define why your product is necessary to be put on the market. Why does it need to go on the market with the limited testing that you've done? What kind of unmet needs does your product meet by going onto the market right now? The FDA also wants you to clearly describe to them what risks are associated with your product and what really are those benefits from that product, and describe what safety and effective information that you already have. Additionally, they want you to provide them safety information. So do you have data from a controlled clinical study? If so, provide that data. Do you have data from a bench study? The FDA wants to talk about your effectiveness information. How does your product, what's the mechanism of action for you to diagnose that product? Have you got any evidence from real life human experience using your product? Do you have performance data that says how your product works, the analytical sensitivity, the analytical specificity, and does this come from fresh data, contrived data, or from archived or banked specimens? And finally, the FDA really, really wants you to contact them in advance of you making any submission to them so that they can understand what data that you want to present to them for your emergency use authorization and give you feedback if they do not believe you have sufficient information to make an emergency use authorization approval possible. Now, I will switch gears and just say from a Canadian perspective, Health Canada has said the same thing. Health Canada has said, before you submit something to us, please, manufacturers, contact us, have a discussion with us, let us know what you're planning on submitting, let us tell you whether we think the information you have is going to be sufficient to allow this interim order or an emergency use authorization for your product. At the end of the day, the regulators want the products to go on the market, they want them to work, and they don't want to waste time reviewing applications that don't have sufficient materials in them. Now, in addition to what we've already talked about, the FDA really wants you to clearly tell them as part of your submission what studies you also have going that aren't completed as of right now, whether that's long-term stability data studies, whether that's additional analytical performance studies. They want you to present that information to them in a form of, these are the studies we're doing, these are the times that we expect to be able to provide that data to you. And as important, the FDA wants you to submit that data to them when you collect it. So if you have additional tests that you're conducting and FDA gives you an emergency use authorization, FDA expects that you provide to them the results of that data after the fact, after that emergency use authorization, so they can continue to review your device and ensure that you're providing a device that's safe and effective for its intended purpose. Now, the emergency use authorization has also come with one really important piece, which the FDA has made the decision that they're going to waive the requirements under their CFR Part 820, which is their good manufacturing practice requirements, for full compliance to the design control requirements. That means companies don't have to fully follow all of the requirements that FDA has laid out for designing and developing a product to be released into the US market. Okay, so we now have that approval. We now have that authorization to sell our product. What do we have to do now? Well, the FDA has clearly said that you must post on your website, which means if you don't have a good website, you need to put one together. But you must post on your website the fact sheet for healthcare providers and fact sheet for patients, which is an overview of your product, an overview of COVID-19, and a description of your sensitivity and specificity. The FDA has also said that you must collect information on the performance of your product. You must report occurrences to them of any false positives or false negatives that were unexpected, or any deviations from the established performance characteristics of the product as they become aware. So if you start seeing data that's coming back from a production run where you are not getting the same performance characteristics, FDA has this expectation that you must report to them this information. FDA has also clearly said, as has all the other regulators around the world, so this is not an FDA only requirement, that you must track and report to the FDA or the other regulators any adverse events that are associated with your product. Anytime that there's an incident where there are significant false negatives, significant false positives, FDA expects you to report that information to them. Now, after you have your authorization letter, and it's important to note that the FDA's authorization letter isn't a one-page letter that just says, congratulations, you can go on and start selling your product. It is a detailed letter of about 7 different pages with a number of requirements that you as a manufacturer must follow, clearly telling you the things I've already talked about, plus an additional variety of things that they're expecting from you based on your type of product, so based on your diagnostic or detection product, that they're expecting to get from you on a regular basis. Now, the FDA has clearly said that if you plan on making any changes to your device, again, you must contact them and discuss with them those changes before you proceed with those changes. What might be considered a simple change for companies who are not in a regulated environment may not be a simple change when we're dealing with a diagnostic product like this. Okay, so let's fast forward to the future sometime, whether that's March, like Harry was suggesting, whether that's some other time in the future. But at some point in the future, the FDA and regulators are going to say, the COVID-19 is no longer a pandemic. What does that mean? Well, the FDA has clearly stated in a letter to, in all their letters of authorization to companies, I should say, that your emergency use authorization will be effective until the decision has been made that the emergency use authorization is revoked, which means there is no longer a public health safety requirement. Therefore, if you want to make your product available, and they clearly indicate this in their letter, if you want to make your product available after the pandemic is over, after the FDA has revoked your emergency use authorization, you must start working on a submission to the FDA under their standard approach for regulatory submissions, whether that is the FDA 510K, whether that's an FDA de novo application, or an FDA PMA. It's also important to note that the FDA really hasn't defined what those types of submissions are going to be necessary for the different COVID tests that are out there right now. Therefore, seek an audience with the FDA. Go out, talk to them. Hey, we have an idea for taking this product, which we have today, and we'd like to make this available after the emergency use authorization is over. FDA does expect you as a manufacturer to go through the traditional pathway once that product has gone through the emergency use authorization and you have sufficient data to support a real submission, a true submission. I shouldn't say that emergency authorization isn't a real submission. It most definitely is, but a submission that is covered under the FDA 510K, de novo, or PMA. But earlier I'd mentioned that the FDA doesn't have this requirement in place right now for you to follow design control. If you're seeking the ability to have this product made available in the future, and you're talking to the FDA about having this product available, it's important that you start talking to the FDA about what else is necessary in addition to just having good clinical and bench data to support your application in the future. Again, once the emergency use authorization is gone, once the declaration of the pandemic has been removed, unless you have got the FDA review of your product, you must stop selling the product, which means it must stop being used in the United States. And somehow my name got crossed out on this page, but I will yield my time back for the Q&A.
All right. Thank you so much, Daryl. That was super interesting. And I hope that all the people involved in IVDs or emergency use type products in the audience got some value from that perspective as well, because I think there's been a lot of ambiguity as to what people should expect. So with that, before we get to the Q&A, let me just add a couple of notes. So we are doing this every month, and the next month's one is on microfluidics. So if you have an interest in diagnostic assays, then we will be holding that. In September, we actually have secured Amr Salier, who is from Shifamed, which is perhaps the most successful incubator of medtech devices, particularly in the cardiovascular, interventional cardiovascular space. And he's had several exits in the 200 million plus range for pre-revenue companies. So if you're interested in the secrets of efficiently developing medical devices and picking the right ones, you'll want to be part of that. For those of you, there's been a number of questions related to the presentations. So the presentations will be available, and we do have your email, so we will send you a link or the presentation itself. I also note that there's a tab on your website there called Handouts, and we do have one handout up there that's available, which is related to what's the cost of developing a medical device. In case you're interested in budgeting, this is based on historical data from across the industry and our own experience. So with that, I would like to get on to the questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, you'll notice that there's a Q&A tab. So we do have a few questions loaded up already, and then I expect we'll get a few more as we go along here, and we'll just go in for another 10, 15 minutes. So the first question, let me just try to navigate here. Okay, it's related to SAM decertification of mobile health applications. Do you expect any changes from Health Canada or FDA as well? I guess probably Harry would be the one who would understand digital health regulations more than anybody here, or maybe Daryl. Who wants to take a shot at that one?
Harry, if you want to start.
Daryl, my expertise in regulatory in Canada is not.
Okay. That's a great question, and I truly believe that as regulators start to understand the software as a medical device more, the regulations are going to change. What is going to be expected for those applications has to change. Right now, the FDA for a lot of SAMD products that are mobile products have basically I won't say waived the requirements, but they've limited the requirements for a lot of those products. Most of the regulators have been behind in terms of understanding technology. No offense meant to any of them if they're listening in, but that's most definitely been the case. That regulators have been behind, and so with the development of new technologies, they're starting to catch up. Harry, did you want to add anything on the FDA from your perspective?
No, I mean, from the FDA perspective, I mean, they're being very proactive. The leader of the group there for digital has been, I've talked to him, and he's like, I feel like I'm running a startup because everything we're doing is is sort of breaking new ground and very new. So I think they're very receptive to interacting with companies that are moving down that road. And I wouldn't be shy about engaging them in those conversations earlier rather than later.
Great, good answer. Thanks so much. So next question is related to IVD sales roles. What's going to happen to the future of sales in selling IVDs or anything else? Maybe here, you got a bit strong sales background. You might be interested in speculating there.
So I'm sorry, the question was for the existing COVID tests?
Yeah, where do you see the future of B2B sales that the person came from an IVD background?
I think B2B will still be robust. I think for the time being, you're not going to be walking into any places as easily as maybe you did before. But I do think that how those tests and where those tests may be implemented may start to change as people combine remote testing with how they're going to manage their patient population. And I think you're going to see even tech companies start to figure out how to play more of a role in there as they start to learn more and more about how to play in our space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interesting. I know from a StarFish perspective, we've certainly seen some different buyer behaviors than we've seen before. We've closed a couple of large deals in the last month with companies that we haven't actually met face to face, which in the entire history in the last 21 years has never happened. So it's so I think that the buyers are having to adapt as well, right? So it's kind of interesting. Okay, next question. So it's really a question for Darryl. What are you seeing for the regulators for non-COVID related products? What's going on? Is that all getting kicked down the road?
I mean, I think the number of submissions that are coming into the FDA and other regulators are continuing to be at a fairly normal level. Maybe a little bit less than has been in the past. However, the regulators have really been focusing their efforts on these COVID devices. So I think, some of the submissions that we've had go in front of the regulators in the last couple of months have been a little bit slower than they've been before. But in terms of the amount of material that they're looking at, the trying to get through them as quickly as possible. They are trying to meet their timelines as they've specified in their guidance documents. I don't think that really answers the question as well as I could, but that's kind of what we're seeing right now.
But you are seeing some slowdown for things that aren't COVID related.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing some slowdown.
Sort of a follow-on question then from Harushi is, what do you expect to see after COVID? How will the regulators be changed by this?
I think one of the things that some of the regulators, and maybe some of the smaller countries like Canada will be impacted the most, is they're going to start to ask companies to contact them more and more in advance. The idea with COVID and the interim orders in Canada was that you reach out to the regulator soon, reach out to the regulator before you have a product available, and you want to start your application process. I think that's going to help a lot of companies knowing that they can have this time with the regulators. I also think that one of the things that's come out of COVID-19 is there's been a significant number of guidance documents being made available for those specific products. And I'm hoping that this momentum continues so that regulators are creating more guidance documents and updating the guidance documents that have existed for 10 plus years to help manufacturers with their applications in the future.
Great. Okay, next question from Joseph. Do you see any changes coming with patient data gathering and sharing due to the increased demands from telehealth? Are there new opportunities for new technologies and applications in this area? Maybe that's a hairy question.
Yes, that's a loaded question. There's lots, and I mean, that's a long discussion, but I think what you're seeing now is an extreme lack of ability to communicate with a patient. I mean, you can use FaceTime, you can use just about anything to communicate right now. I think what we'll see is a pullback to more HIPAA compliant methods of communication, systems that have an integrated EHR in the system so that you can see patient data potentially remote monitoring technologies at the patient location so that you get live data from the patient. This is why you're seeing, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all starting to step up in very interesting ways to play a larger role. So I think the opportunities are going to be quite interesting, and I don't think that the game is going to be played exactly the same way that it was 6 months ago or 12 months ago as we take things forward.
Great. There's a related question asking whether CVS and some of those new players are investing in companies as well. Is there any shift in the investor landscape?
I think you're seeing, if you look at reports from groups like Rock Health, which do a good job looking at the space, you'll see that digital is incredibly strong from an investment standpoint across the board. There's been a drop in early stage investment right now, but I don't expect that to be the way that it's going to go. I think people are just harvesting or looking for things that might be a little bit safer, but there's a lot of dry powder on the sidelines waiting to go into early stage investments. If CVS or Walgreens or these have investment arms, I think these are areas that they are actively looking into, but I don't know which one of those has a venture arm and which one doesn't.
Okay, thank you. Next question, another regulatory. What's happening regarding to the EMC and safety related to the emergency use? Are they going a little softer on that?
That's a great question, because actually we've faced that same question on a project I was working with your team, Scott. With COVID-related products, so products are going through emergency use authorization and interim orders. Going soft is really not the best answer. The regulators are looking at it from a risk-based perspective. There's a request for you to provide data that shows your product is safe for its use in its intended environment from an EMC perspective, for example, from an electrical safety perspective. There's still an expectation you to provide some testing data, and there might even be the possibility that the company will be asked to provide a full data set after their application has been reviewed.
Great, thank you. Also on a somewhat similar note, there's a question from Lee. How does this information for IVDs relate to more devices such as ventilators, and how are the regulators dealing with those?
That's a great question. I don't have all of my data in front of me really quickly. I had it had it earlier, but I didn't have it for this presentation. I will reach out to you and to the group afterwards with a little bit more data in terms of the ventilators and other non-IVD products in terms of the approvals for the US and some other items on that after this presentation.
Great. Well, we, having just developed a ventilator, are kind of informed that it seemed like they were processing things a little faster. Right now, we're just waiting for Health Canada clearance prior to FDA for a ventilator, and it seems like they're moving quickly, but not as quickly as they were a month ago. So that seems like it.
And that might be, Scott, too, based on some of the questions that have come up in terms of some of the technologies they're seeing and the quality of the data that they're receiving.
Right. Great. We have a question related to COVID collection kits. Seems like they're all over the map and all sorts of different things. Do we expect to see more standardization? Maybe that's a Nick question.
Yep, so I'm muting my mic. There we are. I think I'm muted. I think this is it's absolutely true. I mean, there's a number of them that we have here that we're doing for a different project, and one of the interesting things that I tried to allude to there in my presentation is, this technology has been around for a while, and like with any novel one, there's going to be a step change in some of these things, and indeed it's going to be driven by technology. So, for example, right now we need the nasopharyngeal swab because of testing considerations, but there's a lot of work being developed in saliva tests, and just like was mentioned on the regulatory side, verifying and validating that is equivalent to the swab is going to be the big hurdle there to seeing changes.
Sure. Okay, you have a follow-up question here, Nick. What microbiome managing devices do you foresee, or is it just a pill-based approach? I happen to know you know something about that. That's from Fedor.
Yeah, yeah. So there's the microbiome's an is a very interesting creature, and particularly how we access it and what we can do there in terms of managing it. So we've had some interesting programs here with ingestible autonomous platforms to be able to support some development in that area. And that's certainly something that will be on the horizon. There's going to be some, as you allude to here, Fedor, some pill-based approaches, perhaps just on the chemistry side. But there's also the other way of delivering things, and that's something that likely we'll see as well.
Great. On IVDs, there's a question. Everybody's jammed up on supply chain right now. Any sort of advice relating to dealing with supply chain for in vitro diagnostics? I know we don't have any supply chain people on the call here. Just be patient would be my first cut. Things will balance out. It's just the market will do what markets do, but it's a little crazy right now. Okay. Okay, there's one. Maybe this is a good one to wrap up on. Somebody wants Daryl as a consultant, so you can talk to them later, Daryl. But I'm interested, each of you, to give some viewpoints how medical device startups should move forward. There you go. Maybe that's if I could. That would be a good way to wrap up. Our in vitro diagnostics, I think, would count as medical devices. So maybe we'll go in order. Harry, do you want to give a quick summary of what people should take away from COVID?
From COVID, I would say that from a COVID perspective, I see it as a significant opportunity. I would say that it's an opportunity for raising capital if your product fits. I would say that it's an opportunity to rethink your model, that there may be ways of introducing a product or working a product forward that isn't the traditional methods. I can tell you, I know a bunch of my friends have literally had to pivot their companies in different directions and almost are doing better on the pivot than they were before. So that's where I get encouragement from the opportunity. I would also tell you that if you do not have a data strategy that you're incorporating into your product, you really need to think about how to incorporate that into what you're doing and how you can create a data stream going forward, because I think that's going to be critical regardless of the outcome of where we end up.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Move on to Nick. Any closing thoughts on how to act as a medical device company right now?
Yeah, so great question. In terms of COVID-19 related diagnostics, use as the example. My advice, as with every person that comes through the door here, would be know your target product profile, understand where it's going to be used, what regulatory folks you're going to have to talk to, and understand how that device is going to be used, because that's really going to drive and streamline the development process.
Great. So be organized and think ahead. All right, and I'm sure you'll say something totally different from that, Daryl.
No, I'm very much in agreement with Nick. I think the biggest thing that companies need to be thinking about going forward is where do they want to be 6 months from now? Where do they want to be 12 months, 2 years, 5 years? Don't be just thinking about today. You've got to be, when you're planning your product development, you've got to be thinking about what you're going to have, when you can have it, and also, as importantly, and to Nick's point, is your product going to have a benefit? Is there someone who wants to use your product? Don't just develop a product because it sounds cool or it looks great. Harry, I can see you laughing, but it's true. So many companies I've worked with haven't really understood their intended population. They don't really understand what the product is and how it's going to be used. Figure that out before you start spending a significant amount of time and money on your development.
Daryl, I wrote a book specifically on all the stages so that people didn't do that anymore. So I totally understand what you're saying.
So what was the name of your book, Harry, so people can download it?
It's Commercialization of Novel IVDs. and it's like a textbook for people to understand regulatory reimbursement. I mean, it covers the whole gamut so that when you get to the end, hopefully you've got something that the market wants and works and, you know, is approved through the regulatory process.
So that's great. Just go look up Harry Glorickian. There won't be too many other ones into writing medical
That's
textbooks,
true.
and you can buy that. All right. Well, thank you all very much. It's been super. We've been getting wonderful comments, and I think everybody's got a lot of value from today's seminar, and it's encouraging. So we'll keep doing it every month, and we'll keep fine-tuning our methods here. So thanks again. Hope you all got a lot of value. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.